Hello everyone, I'm Bill Hammond and I actually paid to see this. And welcome back once more to the Oscar Blitz, where I break down every category at the 95th Academy Awards. Be sure to subscribe both to this channel and actuallypaid.com in order to keep up with all the coverage, and if you're feeling charitable, hit all those important buttons down there to get the YouTube algorithm working in my favor for once. Today's category is one of my personal favorites, live action short. Ever since I started blitzing my way through award season, the highlight has always been the short film categories, because all 5 nominees are released as a bundle for theatrical screening, meaning you get to watch the entire thing in just one sitting. There's such a wide variety of filmmaking styles, stories, and represented cultures that at times it can be hard to judge the overall quality. But for me, the apples to oranges nature is a major part of the fun. You just never know what you're going to get with the shorts, whether it's live action, animation, or documentary, and I'm overjoyed that I get to share one of the groups with you now, so let's get to it. An Irish Goodbye, Tom Berkeley and Ross White. If there's one group of people who embody the old adage that comedy is tragedy plus time, it's the Irish. Trust me, it's in our blood, along with copious amounts of whiskey. This film is a perfect example of it. Seamus O'Hara and James Martin star as Turlough and Lorcan, 2 brothers who have recently lost their mother. After coming home from the funeral, Lorcan, who has Down syndrome, is distraught over the possibility that Turlough is making arrangements to sell the family farm and send him to live with their aunt. Refusing to go, he brings out a bucket list of 100 things that their mother wanted to do before she died, and Turlough agrees to go along with Lorcan's plan to approximate each activity as best they can, using the urn containing their mother's ashes. Darkly hilarious throughout and filled with loving profanity, this daft misadventure is everything you want in a short film. I was laughing the whole way through, and I even teared up a couple of times because I know my own mother's time is coming soon, and God knows I've been wondering how my sister and I are going to be able to cope when it happens. I can only hope that we're half as good as these brothers are. Evalu, Anders Walter and Rebecca Pruzan. Told almost entirely through narration, Evalu is the story of a young woman looking for her missing sister. There was a time when Pippa Luke and Evalu were inseparable, but now the latter is gone, disappeared from the indigenous Greenland fishing community where they grew up. Guided by a raven, Pippa Luke searches every landmark in the area, hoping for clues to Evalu's whereabouts and realizing some very troubling truths along the way. Visually, the film is stunning, with the cinematography of the frozen Greenland setting really going a long way towards getting the mood right. But honestly, the overall story didn't do much for me, mostly because Pippa Luke's inner monologue waxes a bit too poetic and philosophical for my taste. This feels like a bigger story than what we see in the very brief 16-minute runtime. There may not be enough in the graphic novel's source material to stretch it out to a feature, but I get the feeling that even if we expanded it to get closer to the 40-minute time limit, that this would have felt much more complete. Le Pupille, Alice Warvacher and Alfonso Cuarón. Given the star power behind the camera and the studio heft that Disney puts behind it, this is probably the favorite going into the voting period. But from where I sit, this is also the weakest of the field. Presented as being clumsily put together from a letter read by a student at a strict Catholic boarding school during Italy's fascist period, the clumsiness is the most true part of the whole film, and it's very much to the story's detriment. Meant to be a slice of life for a bunch of orphan girls in a convent on Christmas Eve, the title, having a double meaning of both the pupils of the girls' eyes and the fact that they're students, is meant to draw your attention to small acts of rebellion, but it just doesn't land. There are too many random moments, like one of the nuns being substituted for a man with a thick mustache, that make it extremely difficult to follow whatever passes for the story, only for the drawn-out moral to be the equivalent of, shit happens. That's just not satisfying. Disney took what could have been a charming story about free-spirited children and turned it into a bastardized parade of nonsensical puppetry. Not that one. Substituting bad editing for whimsy, the film tries to pass itself off as an Italian version of Matilda, but ends up cutting itself off before it can ask any real questions, either of 1930s Italian society or the church itself. You might as well throw in a "he gets us" slogan at the end if you're just going to waste our time like that. Night Ride, Erik Tveiten, and Gote Lid Larsen. Coming from Norway, this charming entry is an exercise in empathy. Ebba, a little person, waits for a tram on a cold, snowy evening, and through some shenanigans ends up absconding with the tram. She picks up a few passengers, including an aggressive man named Alan, who immediately begins insulting Ebba and hitting on a woman named Ariel. Ariel is receptive until it's revealed that she's actually a drag queen, leading Alan and his mates to become increasingly belligerent. It is then up to Ebba to stand up for herself and Ariel despite her small stature, and the end result is both funny and heartwarming. I really dig this film because there are so many directions it could go, any number of which would make sense. That creates legitimate suspense while still being lighthearted enough to know that nothing truly drastic will happen to betray the tone. The Red Suitcase, Cyrus Neshvad. Speaking of drastic, however, we end on a truly tense entry. Set in the Luxembourg airport, a teenage girl timidly reaches for her luggage, clearly afraid of what's to come. Trying to figure out any delay tactic to avoid going through customs, her fears are quickly made apparent, as it turns out she's been promised by her Iranian father as a bride to a much older man who awaits her in the terminal. Like an episode of 24, the story plays out in real time as the girl tries to give any signal to authorities about what's happening without being able to speak any of their language, German, French, or English at different points. In a tiny space in the middle of a European microstate, this poor girl has to think fast before her life is stolen from her forever before it can even begin. Her betrothed is a constant presence, a threat she desperately needs to escape, but within such a small setting, is there any reasonable way out? The suspense is palpable, and like an inverse of Night Ride, there are so many possible outcomes, but most of them are negative, and that keeps the viewer on the edge of their seat the whole way through. So, now that I've been able to process all that, this is my personal order for the rankings. In 5th place is Le Pupille. It has its moments, I'll grant, but it's just too random and Disney-fied for my taste, and really for no good reason. In 4th place is Evalu. 3rd goes to Night Ride. 2nd to The Red Suitcase. And if I had a vote, I would cast it for An Irish Goodbye, because sometimes you just need a good laugh in the face of sadness. God knows I needed it. That's all for this week. As always, keep it locked on the blog, actuallypaid.com, for more analysis of all 23 categories in this year's Oscars, and make sure you tune in next week for my take on Best Picture, as well as my official predictions for who will actually take home the gold. Until then, I'm Bill Hammond. I actually paid to see this.